My husband called me ugly after a fire, abandoned me, then begged for my $3 million settlement. So I exposed his ultimate betrayal in court. For 10 years, my life was a carefully tended garden. I chose the plot of land, a quiet suburban street with towering oak trees that whispered secrets to the wind. I tilled the soil, pulling out the weeds of financial instability left by my husband, Mark, and planting the seeds of security with the salary from my graphic design career. Our house, a modest two-story colonial, was my masterpiece. I loved the way the morning light spilled into the kitchen, the scent of the rose bushes I planted along the walkway, the familiar creak of the third step on the staircase. It was our sanctuary, built on what I thought was a foundation of mutual love and sacrifice. I remember the day we signed the papers. I was 24, brimming with a faith in him that felt as solid as the brick fireplace in our future living room. I'd used the inheritance my mother left me to cover 80% of the down payment. When the loan officer asked how we wanted to title the property, Mark squeezed my hand. As a team, he'd said, his smile so bright it could have lit the room, "Everything we have is for both of us." I nodded, my heart swelling. My own father, a man made cynical by life's hard knocks, had pulled me aside a week earlier. "Always keep your own papers, Clara," he'd warned, his voice raspy. Love is love, but wisdom is wisdom. I dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man who didn't understand the kind of modern, equal partnership Mark and I had. Mark was a man of grand dreams. He was a former high school quarterback whose promising college career had been cut short by a knee injury. The ghost of that stolen future haunted him, making him chase one entrepreneurial fantasy after another. There was the gourmet food truck that never left the driveway, the app for rating local parks that nobody downloaded, the artisanal coffee roasting business that ended with third-degree burns and a call to the fire department. And through it all, I was the fixer. I paid the bills, smoothed things over with creditors, and encouraged his next big idea, believing that my steadfast support was the bedrock of his confidence. His mother, Brenda, a widow who had poured her entire identity into her son, reinforced this belief. "A good wife always supports her husband's dreams, no matter the cost," she'd say to me over Sunday dinners, patting my hand while her eyes held a glint of something that wasn't kindness. It was a warning. Mark was her life's work, and my role was to be the silent, smiling investor. I didn't see it as a cage then. I saw it as a partnership. His charisma, my stability. We were a team. I failed to see that in his eyes, my competence was not a comfort, but a constant, glaring reminder of his own failures. His signature phrase, delivered with a casual shrug, was, "I'm just being honest." It was the weapon he used to deliver 1,000 tiny cuts. "I'm just being honest, honey. That client of yours seems a little too friendly." Or, "I'm just being honest. That dress isn't the most flattering on you." The day my world burned, I was driving home from a client meeting. I just landed a major contract, the kind that would finally allow us to renovate the kitchen he'd always complained about. I was humming along to the radio, thinking about what color to paint the cabinets, when a drunk driver ran a red light. The world became a symphony of violence. The screech of tires, the explosive crunch of metal, the sickening jolt that threw me against the seatbelt. My car spun, a toy in the hands of a cruel giant, and slammed into the side of a tanker truck illegally stopped in the intersection. I remember a second impact, a strange, whooshing sound, and then heat. A suffocating, searing heat that seemed to consume the very air I was trying to breathe. The smell of burning plastic and gasoline filled my nostrils. My last conscious thought was a silent, desperate prayer before the blackness swallowed me whole. I woke up to a world of white. White ceilings, white sheets, and the muffled, beeping language of machines. The first few days were a morphine-laced fog, a blur of pain and hushed voices. In my haze, I thought I felt Mark's hand in mine, a familiar, warm anchor in a sea of agony. Or maybe I just willed the memory into existence, a desperate attempt to find a piece of the old world in the ruins of the new one. As the fog began to lift, so did the veil on my new reality. The doctors were kind, their voices soft as they explained the extent of the damage. Third-degree burns covering the left side of my body. My face, my arm, my leg. permanent disfigurement, nerve damage in my left hand, the hand that held a stylus with the precision of a surgeon, now a near-useless appendage. A future paved with skin grafts, reconstructive surgeries, and a pain that would become my constant companion. I saw the change in Mark before I saw it in the mirror. He grew distant. The hand-holding stopped. He'd sit in the chair by the window, scrolling endlessly through his phone, his face illuminated by its cold blue light. When I tried to talk to him, his answers were clipped, his eyes avoiding mine. The air in the room grew heavy with unspoken words. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling debridement session where the nurses had to scrape away the dead tissue from my burns, I felt a wave of despair wash over me. I was raw, physically and emotionally. I looked at my husband, this man I had built my entire life around, and I pleaded for a sliver of normalcy. "Mark," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Talk to me. Tell me about the house. Is the dog okay?" He was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at a world that was no longer mine. When he finally turned to look at me, his face was a mask of strained pity. "What is it?" I begged. "Please, just talk to me." He took a deep breath. "I have to be honest, Clara," he began, and my blood ran cold. "I'm struggling with this." He gestured vaguely at my bandaged form. "I find it difficult to look at you." His voice dropped, but his words hit me with the force of a physical blow. "You're unbelievably ugly now. I don't know if I can handle being married to someone who looks like that." The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. The world seemed to tilt and fall away, leaving me in a silent, sterile vacuum. There was no scream, no sob. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a quiet, shattering realization that the man I loved was looking at me not with compassion, but with disgust. He was another casualty of the fire, and he was taking my heart with him into the ashes. When I finally found my voice, it was a stranger's, chillingly calm and steady. "If that's how you feel," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching, "then you should leave. I need to focus on healing, and I can't do that with you here." He had the audacity to look offended. "You're being unfair, Clara. I'm just being honest. You always said honesty was important." He stood up, grabbing his jacket. "My life is ruined too, you know." He walked out of the room, leaving behind the stench of his self-pity. He didn't look back, and in the crushing silence that followed, I understood. The fire didn't just take my skin. It had burned away a 10-year illusion and left me with the cold, horrifying truth. I was utterly and completely alone. The days that followed Mark's departure bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of pain management, wound care, and a silence that was louder than any explosion. He didn't come back. He didn't call. My sister, Sarah, who had flown in the moment she heard about the accident, became my fortress. She was the one who answered my phone, her voice growing progressively colder with each call she fielded from our family. Mark's only direct communication was a single, sterile text message a week later. "Hope you are doing okay. Just checking if you arranged the next mortgage payment." I stared at the words on Sarah's phone screen until they blurred together. He wasn't worried about my survival. He was worried about his credit score. Brenda's campaign began in earnest. She didn't call me directly. She called Sarah, her voice dripping with a cloying, manipulative sympathy. "The poor boy is in shock. Sarah," she'd weep into the phone. "He's traumatized. Seeing the woman he loves like that, it's broken him. Clara is being so cruel, pushing him away in his time of need." She even suggested that my pain medication was making me irrational and that I owed my husband an apology. Sarah, usually the epitome of politeness, finally snapped. "He called her ugly, Brenda," she'd said, her voice like ice. "He abandoned her in a hospital bed. If anyone is broken, it's because he shattered them. Don't you dare call this phone again with your disgusting excuses." She hung up, her hands shaking with rage. That was my rock bottom. Alone in the sterile quiet of the rehab facility I'd been moved to, I finally asked for a mirror. The nurse looked at me with pity, but I insisted. The person who stared back was a stranger. A mosaic of pink, puckered scars and unnaturally smooth, grafted skin covered the left side of my face. My left eye drooped slightly, and my mouth was pulled into a permanent, lopsided grimace. My hair had been shaved on one side, revealing the patchwork of my scalp. Mark's words echoed in the silent room. Unbelievably ugly. A single, hot tear traced a path through the ravaged landscape of my cheek. It was a tear not of self-pity, but of profound, gut-wrenching grief for the woman I had been and the life I had lost. But in that moment of absolute despair, something else flickered to life. A tiny, cold ember of anger. He didn't get to define me. He didn't get to be the final word on my story. My healing began in a small, quiet room with a therapist named Dr. Evans. She was a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. In our sessions, I didn't just talk about the accident. I talked about the 10 years that preceded it. She helped me see the pattern I had been blind to, my deep-seated need to be the fixer, a role I'd adopted in childhood to manage my own father's unreliability. I saw how Mark had instinctually recognized and exploited that trait, building his life on my foundation of self-sacrifice. "You weren't his partner, Clara," Dr. Evans said, gently one afternoon. "You were his infrastructure." The word hung in the air between us, stark and true. And with that truth came a shift. My grief began to slowly, painstakingly, transmute into resolve. Sarah, seeing the change in me, helped me take the next step. She found Ms. Albright, a personal injury lawyer with a reputation for being a shark in the courtroom and a saint to her clients. Ms. Albright was a tall, impeccably dressed woman whose sharp intelligence was immediately apparent. When I told her my story, she listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. "From now on," she said when I finished, her voice firm, "we operate with a new set of rules. Emotion is our fuel, but logic is our weapon. Document everything. Every text, every email, every missed call. We are building a case not just against the drunk driver, but against the narrative that you are anything less than a survivor." She was the one who explained the logic of the settlement. The trucking company, whose tanker had been illegally parked, was embroiled in a separate federal safety scandal. The last thing they wanted was the publicity of a trial involving a severely burned woman. They will want to make this go away quickly and quietly, Ms. Albright had predicted. That gives us leverage. Her confidence was a balm on my raw nerves. On her advice, I officially filed for divorce. It wasn't an act of anger, but one of profound, necessary self-preservation. The first twist in my path forward didn't come from an outside source, but from within my own past. While going through my finances with Sarah to prepare for the divorce proceedings, I stumbled upon an old storage box I'd brought from my father's house after he passed away. It was filled with old photos and mementos. At the very bottom, tucked inside a dusty photo album, was a faded manila envelope. I almost tossed it aside, but something made me open it. Inside was a collection of documents from my wedding 10 years ago, and there, clipped to a copy of my marriage license, was a notarized gift letter from my father and a certified bank check. It detailed in clear legal language that the six-figure sum for the down payment on the house was a gift exclusively to me, his daughter, Clara Reed. I stared at the document, my heart pounding. I remembered it now, a vague memory of my father insisting I sign it at his lawyer's office. In the whirlwind of wedding planning, I'd forgotten all about it. Mark had been there. He had seen it. And for 10 years, he had let me believe that the house, my sanctuary, was a shared burden we had shouldered together. He had let me feel indebted to him for a home that was, in reality, almost entirely mine. The betrayal was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. It wasn't just that he had left me when I was broken. It was that he had been lying to me when I was whole. I carefully placed the documents into a new, clean envelope. This wasn't just a piece of paper. It was my first real weapon, and I was finally learning how to use it. The news of the settlement came on a Tuesday morning. Ms. Albright's voice was calm and professional over the phone, but I could hear the underlying triumph. "They've agreed to our terms, Clara. $3 million. I sank onto the edge of my bed. The phone pressed hard against my ear. The number felt abstract, unreal. It wasn't a lottery win. It was a life-altering sum of money that represented every future surgery, every hour of lost income. Every single night, I would wake up screaming from nightmares of fire. It was the price tag for my pain. But it was also something else. It was freedom. It was a guarantee that I would never have to depend on anyone else ever again. I asked Ms. Albright to keep the news as quiet as possible, but in the small circles of law and insurance, secrets like that have a short shelf life. It took exactly 6 days for the news to reach Mark. His transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The silence was shattered by a barrage of phone calls. When I didn't answer, the voicemails began. They were performances of Oscar-worthy remorse. "Clara, honey, it's me. I made a terrible mistake. I was scared. I was a fool. I miss you so much." His voice would crack with manufactured emotion. "Please, just let me talk to you." Then came the texts, a flood of digital love bombing. He recalled old memories, inside jokes, and plans we had made. He told me he loved me, that he had always loved me, that he couldn't live without me. It was so transparent, so utterly shameless, that it was almost comical. The vulture had smelled a fresh kill. When I blocked his number, he escalated. One evening, the buzzer to my new apartment, a small, accessible unit Sarah had helped me find, shrieked through the quiet. I ignored it. Then came the banging on the door. "Clara, it's me, Mark. Please, I just want to apologize. Let me in." Sarah was with me that night. Without a word, she picked up her phone and dialed 911. When the police arrived, they found Mark in the hallway, his face a mask of desperation. He told them he was just a worried husband trying to see his sick wife. They escorted him from the property with a warning against harassment. We filed a report. Every piece of his desperation was now a piece of my evidence. His most audacious performance came a week later. I was leaving my outpatient physical therapy session, leaning heavily on my cane, my body aching from the effort. He was waiting in the parking lot, looking disheveled, as if he'd been sleeping in his car. He rushed towards me, his hands outstretched. "Clara, please." I flinched back instinctively. "Leave me alone, Mark." My voice was low, but it didn't tremble. "You're not welcome here." "I was wrong," he cried, his voice getting louder, attracting the attention of people getting into their cars. "I was a coward. I love you. Don't you understand?" And then, to my utter horror, he dropped to his knees on the gritty asphalt of the parking lot. "Please, Clara, take me back. We could be a family again. I'll take care of you." I looked down at this pathetic, kneeling man, and I felt nothing but a cold, profound disgust. The love was gone, replaced by a clarity so sharp it hurt. He wasn't begging for me. He was begging for my $3 million. Thankfully, one of my therapists saw the scene from the window and came out with a security guard. They made Mark leave and ensured I got to Sarah's car safely. That incident was the final piece Ms. Albright needed. The next day, a formal restraining order was filed. Cornered and desperate, Mark made his final, fatal mistake. Through his lawyer, he contested the divorce, claiming a right to half of our assets. And as his piece de resistance, he produced a post-nuptial agreement, supposedly signed 5 years prior. The document, filled with convoluted legal jargon, essentially stated that any future financial windfall, including personal injury settlements, would be considered joint marital property. "It's a forgery," I told Ms. Albright, my voice flat. "I know," she said calmly, "and we're going to prove it." He sent it as a PDF attachment from his email, didn't he? I confirmed he had. "Good," she said, a thin, dangerous smile playing on her lips. He just handed us the rope to hang him with. The second, decisive twist in our story wouldn't come from a dramatic confession or a hidden camera. It came from the cold, irrefutable logic of the digital age. Ms. Albright hired a digital forensics expert. This expert didn't need to hack a computer or bribe a witness. All he needed was the file Mark had so foolishly emailed. The report came back a week before a court date. It was my true smoking gun. The metadata embedded deep within the PDF file told a story that Mark couldn't lie his way out of. It showed the document was created on a specific laptop, which a simple subpoena confirmed belonged to Brenda. It showed it had been created just 2 weeks ago, not 5 years. And the most damning detail of all, it was created using a version of Adobe Acrobat that hadn't even been released 5 years ago. It was a digital ghost, a phantom document born of greed and desperation. But Brenda, in her infinite arrogance, provided the final nail for their shared coffin. Furious about the restraining order, she had sent a long, vitriolic stream of text messages to Sarah. In her rage, her mask had slipped completely. "He deserves that money." One text read, "After all he's been through, that agreement was my idea to protect him from your sister's greed. We were just trying to get what's legally ours." Sarah had saved every single one. She forwarded the entire conversation to Ms. Albright. The trap was set. All we had to do was wait for the day in court. The courtroom was cold and impersonal, smelling faintly of old paper and stale coffee. I sat beside Ms. Albright, my back straight, my hands resting on my cane. Across the room, Mark sat with his lawyer, looking pale and jittery. Brenda was in the front row of the gallery, her face set in a scowl of self-righteous indignation. She was trying to stare me down, but I refused to give her the satisfaction. I kept my eyes fixed on the judge. Mark's lawyer presented their case with a blustering, unearned confidence. He spoke of Mark's emotional distress, his trauma, and the sanctity of their 10-year marriage. He concluded by presenting the post-nuptial agreement as their primary exhibit, the supposed proof of their shared intentions. When it was Ms. Albright's turn, she walked to the lectern with a quiet, lethal grace. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't resort to theatrics. She simply presented the truth, piece by undeniable piece. First, she submitted the gift letter from my father and the corresponding bank statements. The judge, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes, reviewed them carefully. A flicker of interest crossed her face. The ownership of our primary marital asset was now clearly in question. Next, she called the digital forensics expert to the stand. He calmly and clearly explained the metadata analysis, breaking down the technical details into simple, damning facts. He pointed out the creation date, the software version, the laptop ID. With each word, I could see the color draining from Mark's face. His lawyer began to shuffle his papers, his bravado evaporating. Then came the final blow. Ms. Albright presented the string of text messages from Brenda to my sister. She projected them onto the large screen for the entire courtroom to see. Brenda's own words, glowing in black and white. That agreement was my idea to protect him. We were just trying to get what's legally ours. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Brenda sank lower in her seat, her face turning a blotchy red. Mark looked as if he'd been physically struck. He had been exposed not just as a liar, but as a fool, a puppet in his own mother's scheme. The judge looked at Mark, her expression devoid of any sympathy. "Do you have anything to say in response to this, sir?" Before his lawyer could stop him, Mark stood up, his voice cracking. "She's turned everyone against me. It's not fair. That's enough," the judge said, her voice cutting through the air like a guillotine. She then looked at me. "Ms. Reed, do you wish to make a statement?" My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was my moment. I stood, leaning on my cane, and faced the judge, but my words were for the man who had tried to erase me. My voice shook at first, but grew stronger with every word. "Your Honor," I began. "A few months ago, in a hospital room where I was fighting for my life, that man," I gestured towards Mark without looking at him, looked at the scars from the fire that nearly killed me, and called them unbelievably ugly. I paused, letting the words hang in the silent room. For a long time, I believed him, but I've come to understand that he was wrong. These scars, I touched my cheek gently, are not a mark of ugliness. They are a mark of survival. They are proof that I lived through the fire, and they are proof that I will live through his cruelty. They are not the end of my story. They are the beginning of it, the price I had to pay for my freedom. I sat down, my body trembling with the adrenaline of a battle finally won. The judge's verdict was swift and brutal. The divorce was granted. The postnuptial agreement was ruled of blatant forgery, and the matter was referred to the district attorney's office for investigation into potential fraud and perjury charges. My settlement was declared my sole and separate property, untouchable. The marital home's equity was to be divided based on the proven contributions, meaning I would receive over 80% of its value. A permanent restraining order was granted. Mark was left with nothing but his debts, his lies, and his public humiliation. The weeks that followed were quiet. Brenda called Sarah one last time, her voice not tearful, but cold with venom. "I hope she's happy. She destroyed my son." Sarah replied, "Mark destroyed himself, Brenda," and then she blocked her number for good. A chapter of my life was finally, definitively closed. My new life is not a fairy tale. There are days when the nerve pain is a screaming fire along my limbs. There are days when the face in the mirror still feels like a stranger. I attend my therapy sessions, physical, occupational, and psychological. I'm learning to draw again on a specialized tablet. My movements slower, more deliberate, but my creativity, my essence, is still there. Some nights, I sit on the small balcony of my apartment, looking out at the city lights. I've learned the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness was sitting in the same room with a husband who found me repulsive. Solitude is this quiet, peaceful space where I am rebuilding myself, piece by piece. He called my scars ugly, but I now know they're the most beautiful part of me. They're the price of my freedom. It makes me wonder how many of us wear invisible scars from the people who were supposed to love us the most.